the fake document market wasn't something that I focused on before. So even I, after the few couple of months, we started sort of harvesting data systematically, was a sense of, wow, this is so much bigger than I actually even myself thought it could be. Because there's hundreds of these fake document vendors that operate very openly on the web. We've already identified over 150 of something that we call template farms. This term refers to specialized vendors of fake documents. And there's going to be, I'm afraid, so much more.
You're listening to Behind Enemy Lines. In each episode, we'll explore advanced fraud fighting strategies with experts battling financial crime every day. Discover what it takes to stay one step ahead of the most sophisticated fraudsters. Ready to sharpen your defenses? Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Behind Enemy Lines. I'm Mike LaFleur, and this episode is brought to you by ThreatMark, your ally in the war against fraud. Today, our guest is Indra, who runs threat intelligence at Resistance AI. Jan, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Mike, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We talked a little bit about what you do getting ready for the podcast, so I'm really excited about this conversation. Before we get into the conversation, though, I always ask every guest about their origin story. So, think of yourself as a fraud fighting superhero. How did you get from where you were, maybe high school, university, to where you are now at Resistant AI?
All right, sure. Let's break it down. I still like to think of it as sort of the early stages of my professional journey, but thinking about this, it's been over a decade since I've been involved with the financial crime space and investigations. I originally started out as an investigative reporter, finishing my university studies. I joined an emerging investigative nonprofit in the Czech Republic called investigative. And it was a great start, I think, because, I was always passionate about fighting the bad guys, so to speak. And that was sort of the early stages of figuring out how to do any research, really, what OSINT as a term even was, right? So being sort of mentored by older investigative journalists and working on some cross-border projects like the Panama Papers, or some of these other big data leaks, understanding how companies can either hide their funds or even launder money was, I think, a very interesting start and a great experience overall, working with some great reporters out there. And at some point, obviously, I felt like I wanted to do a bit more, right? I felt like I wanted to get a little more serious about how to investigate, how to work with data. A big part of my university journey was focused on data journalism. So I was essentially trying to combine investigative reporting and data journalism because I always felt like, what I love about data is that it speaks for itself to a degree, right? So combining those two fields in a way was the direction I wanted to pursue. And after finishing school, I quite organically, I always tell this story because it's quite a lucky one. I noticed this ad on a board and at our faculty, this job board where companies would try to get some students to onboard. I found this small consultancy focusing on corporate investigations, due diligence, very, very wide scope of projects. But it was, again, a great experience, where we had our own small open source intelligence investigation unit of about 3-4 people. I was mentored by, quite senior and experienced former police officer specializing in investigating financial crime and corruption. So yeah, I think the second sort of phase, because this was another 5 to 6 years, this another phase of the journey really provided me, I think, with understanding how thorough you need to be, how to write these investigative reports, how to not omit any sort of shelves you need to look into or spaces you need to look at, right, in terms of a proper investigation that can take months or years. Obviously, again, the scope of projects would vary from the short-term ones to the long-term ones. But of course, then again, at some point, I think the same sort of thing, and it might happen to a lot of us out there. I think, after a couple of years, you feel the need to sort of move forward and try something else instead as well. And I was always very curious about any type of technology really that helps investigators to conduct their projects. And when the opportunity came from Resistant AI to sort of join a very, very, I think, even to a degree, recognized technology company now for providing one of these very advanced fraud detection solutions, to be able to join a company like that, but still sort of stay on the investigative side of things and do original research. That was just honestly, and even more so, a company that resides in Prague, and I wouldn't have to move for or work remotely. That was really a combination of factors that it was an easy answer for me. And I've been here for I think 10 months now, and it's been a great adventure, and I want to keep this going as long as we can.
That's fascinating. There's a couple things that you said. One, you defined it a little later in your talk, but I just want to explicitly, for those who aren't familiar with the term, OSINT or OSINT is open source intelligence. So can you just describe what that is, just for as a definition for someone who might not be familiar with that?
So open source intelligence, or OSINT as a field, I think over the last decade, because it's a term that originates way back, decades back really, but it really is such a wide field by now that it incorporates a very wide spectrum of different sort of areas you could focus on. But very generally, it's harvesting openly available information and analyzing these, if of course the objective of generating actionable insights. And again, it's such a wide field. You could, look into researching corporations, focusing on geolocation or websites, social media research. There's so many different aspects of this. One of the organizations I was looking at when actually still studying was Bellingcat, as one of the primary examples of an organization that has been sort of the pioneer or some sort of flag bearer for OSINT, right? And definitely recommend to check that one out too. But for me, in terms of OSINT, the specialization was always on the due diligence part early on, the investigation of companies, corporations, or actual people, of course, individuals, and finding, sort of connecting the dots between those. So doing a lot of network mapping, analyzing everything from conflicts of interest to potential misuse of public funds, or some sort of monopolization of industries, and any kind of sort of type of financial crime you can apply this to. So that's the sort of specific part of OSINT that I was focusing.
Yeah, interesting. The other thing that I wanted to mention, we just recorded a podcast episode with a guest where we were talking about, the question I asked him was, is fighting fraud a chase or is it chess? Meaning, chasing the fraud, or is it a chess game? And really the reason I asked that question is you can look at fighting fraud from a couple different perspectives. You can look at it from a tactical perspective, where an operator is looking for things that are happening in real time, and you're gonna chase the fraudsters as they're conducting it. And then you have the other side of it, which is the strategic side, which is where you look for patterns, or you look at the data, you analyze it, and you can start to make predictions about where your threats may come from. And so these can be law enforcement intel people or investigators, or it could be military intelligence analysts or operators. And by that I mean former, right? Because now we're talking about financial crime in the private sector. But now you just introduced a whole new concept that I hadn't really thought about, where you have these investigators like you who started out sort of from a journalistic point of view, doing the same sorts of forensics, same sorts of investigations, looking at the data. So this is just another perspective in the approach to fighting financial crime. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and to a large degree, that goes back to my history when I mentioned the data journalism part. Some of my early projects, even as a student, were about, in the Czech Republic, we have a very sort of transparent and open space when it comes to access to public data on companies or individuals. So often the early objective would be think of or find a way how to find those stories in any sort of data set. And of course, moving on to consultancy or a specific project, that translated into you have a specific question or a specific entity you need to research, and then you need to know where to look. But again, I think those two parts go very much hand in hand, both the data and the investigative part. And when you mentioned the chess and chasing, I think that's a very nice concept I actually haven't really heard before. I think I'm sort of gradually moving from maybe the chess part, because a lot of my investigations prior to joining Resistant was about obviously investigating events that have already happened or incidents. But now, of course, getting closer to the chasing part, understanding how, our adversaries operate in real time. What are the latest trends, the latest techniques or strategies they use to commit document fraud? And of course, the chess part still very much matters, but I think it really is a gradual sort of progression towards understanding this in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. That leads to a great segue. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. You just talked about documents. Can you explain just a little bit about what your role is right now in threat intelligence at Resistant AI?
So to just, give a pretty general explanation, Resistant AI, one of its flagship products, is focused on verification of documents. Our product can pretty much analyze any document from anywhere. And of course, while the tool already is able to, detect forgery and tampering of documents on its own, the idea behind forming the Threat Intelligence Unit last year was that we very much need to proactively research something that I call the document fraud community or fraudster community. We very much need to proactively research these guys and understand how they operate, what kind of fake documents or document templates they offer, on the wide web, pretty much, which I think we'll get to later. So I think the general idea behind this was to sort of really have a deep understanding of the fraudulent document market ecosystem, and to even, in a certain sense, try to be a pioneer and educate the market or the financial crime space on this, because at least from my knowledge, there isn't that much that has been done on this front before. So yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Admittedly, my background has always been around transactions or behaviors. So I don't really have any experience with the document part of the fraud. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation as we start to pull the thread.
I think there's a lot of synergies. I think this is a good point to mention. We have a second flagship product that focuses exactly on analysis of transactions. And I think when you think about this from a more high level sort of perspective on any sort of financial crime, often, the fake documents serve as a tool for any sort of financial crime, which can include in the later stages, of course, after you open an account, can include the transactions to launder money.
Right.
So these are not isolated sort of spaces, right? But very much connected. Right. And all the better, I think, that, we're talking right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it leads you more towards the chess part, because you're looking at the big picture of what's going on rather than individual transactions or individual documents. You're looking at the big picture of what the fraudsters are trying to do. So how big is the fake document market? Since I know nothing about it, like, how big is this?
It's massive, to put it simply. I've only been doing this for about 11 months. And I think, the fake document market wasn't something that I focused on before. So even after the few couple of months we started sort of harvesting data systematically, was a sense of, wow, this is so much bigger than I actually even myself thought it could be. Because there's hundreds of these fake document vendors, that operate very openly on the web. We've already identified over 150 of something that we call template farms. This term refers to specialized vendors of fake documents. We've already cataloged over 200,000 of fake document templates available on the web. And there's going to be, I'm afraid, so much more. I really think we're still in the sort of beginning stages of the threat intelligence sort of intelligence cycle and setting it up. So we really might be just even now hitting the sort of tip of the iceberg. And I'm very curious for the months or years to come to sort of understand how deep we can actually go. And of course, considering all these implications it has for the global financial economy.
Absolutely. When we were getting ready to talk, I was thinking of, someone producing fake documents as being some sort of niche, right? Like you watch movies and maybe someone needs a fake passport, or they just need something for, in order to elude the spies or something, whatever it is. I always thought it was niche, but you even mentioned it just now. You called it an industry. And so when I hear you saying is in your time working in this space, it is a full blown industry, and people are making, and it's set up as a money making scheme. It's not just people a counterfeiter producing a one-off document. It's a full industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much, an organized crime space, right? I think even ourselves, you could say the initial assumption also maybe was, well, what if this might be just a couple of websites hidden in the dark web that you need to access or you need to find with some level of difficulty, right? Well, I mean, the exact opposite turned out to be true, because when you sort of flip the scenario and think of how these guys need to sell their products, meaning the document templates, they need to be widely accessible and easily findable. So even when I refer to those, 150 plus farms that we found, we really just found those using basic search engines, maybe, some specific queries to use for those. But it very much is a thing that's widely available from the standpoint of, trying to have as much marketability as you can. And of course, websites might be one endpoint or the main sort of basic marketplace for these types of documents or templates. But of course, I think often the sort of classical or basic standard marketing tactics apply to these guys as well. So whether it's leveraging social media or, backlinking, referrals, messaging apps or channels, these guys really don't seem to be that afraid of any sort of implications for themselves personally, which is another key lesson I'm going to refer to later. But it's funny that you mentioned the movie example, because, with a lot of these websites, I would often see this sort of legal disclaimers claiming the fake documents can only be used for novelty purposes. Of course, these farmers very much and very well know who is buying these fake documents. So just sort of a fun fact about it, how they might try to position themselves legally. Because somebody even asked me like a week ago, is this legal? And I'm not a legal professional, so I couldn't give a specific answer. Of course, I would hope not, but it's a different sort of problem on its own, right?
Yeah. I'm not a legal professional either, but there's no way that would hold water. At least not in North America. They may claim that, but I could be wrong. But so, my example was a passport. Well, but what are the kind of documents are there that people can get on these sites?
It might sound almost too frightening, but it's pretty much everything. Something. I mean, of course, if you think about the most frequent examples, or if we look at our threat intelligence database of the fake documents that are being sold online right now, of course, some document types that would lead the pack are the national ID. So everything from ID cards to passports, driver's licenses, residential permits, work travel visas. That's sort of one set of these document types. Another one could be, of course, financial documents, which are used for fraud on an everyday basis, whether it's bank statements, account statements, confirmations of account or so-called bank references, or even payment cards. I think that's another very large group with some of the most frequent document types we've seen. And of course, the sort of third group I created for myself, I call, proofs of X. And what the X is, it can be proofs of address, so utility bills. It can be, proofs of a transaction, so invoices, receipts, proofs of income, pay stubs, proofs of expenses, booking confirmations, or, for example, proofs of ownership, car titles or some deeds. It really, the spectrum of the document types goes up to the hundreds, and one of the articles I wrote about what we've been doing so far, for example, was focusing on something as obscure you would think as death certificates. I think before starting to do this, I never even thought of the death certificate as a document, much less to imagine that a fake template of this kind of document can be pretty much available for any country in the world. Obviously, I guess with the idea of committing some fraud or some other financial.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So these are the, you mentioned that they operate like a business. They have these, you call them template farms. So, they have these websites or like retail sites where they're going to publish the access. And then how does it work? So like, from example, let's say that I'm not going to do this, but let's say that I want to disappear and create a new identity. And so as a consumer, how would it work if I went to one of these retail sites?
So these, the template farms, there's two basic types, I would say. The first one really looks just as a regular online shop. So you have the sort of standard grid-based product listing where you sort of select the kind of document you're interested in. And of course, oftentimes you can both order specific surveys, meaning you can ask the farm to input the personal details in there for you and provide you with the finished product. And of course, if you want to, maybe you have an ambition to be more of a serial fraudster, which is another specific type of fraudster we might look into closer with the intention of committing more attacks. You can, of course, also just buy the template and then do some of the editing on the personal details side yourself. So I think that's one type of the farm with the sort of classic online shop listing. And then, of course, the another type, the second type that is very, very dangerous and something that's been even sort of written about in our space to a degree is the sort of so-called document generator type. With, I think the primary example of this is a platform known as OnlyFake. This is a tool that allows you to sort of input the personal details before or selecting the document. So the first step is to input the details you want, and then you select the type of document you want to generate, and the tool will generate the document for you. So it's a different type of technique of how you get to the final fake. But this one is quite dangerous, specifically because it allows for something we could label as batch generation, right? So imagine I gain access to a personal data leak with records of hundreds or thousands or maybe even more individuals. I could pretty much upload that sort of spreadsheet even to that sort of tool and quickly generate thousands or hundreds of thousands of fake documents, much more increasing the sort of level of threat we're dealing with. Because if you find a vulnerability for any kind of business and their verification processes, you can pretty much flood the gates in a very short span of time. And that's something that we call serial fraud. And we keep seeing these pretty much all the time,
This automation thing, that is frightening. Do you think AI is having an impact on that automated generation?
So I think to some degree, probably yes, but it's still in a way that's sort of still up for debate. Because when we go back to OnlyFake, the vendor I mentioned, and I've written another article about this specific one recently. Looking at that one closely, we haven't really found any sort of advanced AI technology behind it. So the AI might be, as I guess in other sectors as well, might be used as some sort of a marketing buzzword or, a sort of term to help you promote your services rather than being actually leveraged. But at the same time, I think, especially when it comes to, for example, photo generation, faces, or maybe some of these even something that's obviously been discussed sort of uh, within the verification space when you think about liveness checks, deep fakes. Obviously, AI to some degree does permeate. But again, I think this is something that's still being sort of something that we are still figuring out. But of course, it's got to be a factor for sure.
Yeah, you think about the rise of ChatGPT, it just seems like it was yesterday that, it kind of burst onto the scene, but the increase in the proliferation of different models that people can use, the same's going to happen with fraud. So once it bursts in, it's going to have a huge, I think.
And I think the technology, important thing to mention is that the technology is still not there. We've done a couple of webinars specifically on Gen AI and document fraud. And if you think, I just, inputted this kind of technology with a basic prompt, like give me a fake bank statement, it's going to do a bad job. It's not going to be nearly close to the quality you would need to successfully commit fraud. But again, as you mentioned, definitely the concern is there because these technologies will get better. And, with respect to document generation or generation of specific elements, this is going to be leveraged for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of these things, right? So you have these fraudsters that are creating them. people are consuming them and they're gathering these documents. What are some of the impacts of these fake documents?
So of course the main impact has to do with sort of there's obviously numerous processes businesses are dealing with, whether we talk about onboarding, underwriting, screening, all these different processes that business needs to handle on a daily basis, and potentially the increasing volume of documents or clients. This, I think the way my colleague tries to phrase this always, obviously when we refer to technology and go back to it, automation is still an increasingly bigger part of a lot of these processes, including the document processing side. But if you sort of try to integrate this kind of automation without sort of paying attention to the detection tools and to the verification processes, you're automating fraud to a degree. So think of an institution that's onboarding clients to open accounts. And of course, the motivation is to open as many accounts as fast as possible because that's your business. But if you don't have the right if you don't have the right checks and balances in place, as I mentioned earlier, there might be a serial fraudster that's going to flood your systems with thousands of millions of attacks in a very short time span, which can have quite grave implications for your business.
Absolutely.
I think if I was researching a couple cases from the last few years that could be mentioned specifically. If you think about PayPal back in the end of 2021, 2020, early 2022, announcing that around 4.5 million accounts had to be canceled because they were fake, the motivation for fraudsters to attack this was a simple sort of $10 incentive of opening an account and getting those free money. So if you think of a serial fraudster that can leverage this 1,000-fold, withdraw the funds and funnel them further or launder them further, that has some serious implications.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that phrase, automating fraud. There's serious.
Not mine originally, but I kind of like it.
It's pretty interesting. So if you were going to try to not automate fraud, what are some techniques or technologies that could be used to help detect these fake documents and stop this from happening?
So, I think that's sort of the sort of educational part of what we're trying to do, ourselves as well, is there needs to be an understanding that a lot of businesses still rely on manual reviews of documents. But as everything speeds up and the volume increases, that's the one factor why you can't really rely on manual reviews anymore. Obviously, the second one, the fakes are getting increasingly sophisticated, more high quality. Of course, there might be examples where you might be able to spot something with a naked eye, but increasingly we're getting to a point where the manual review is just not enough. You need advanced technology, and I always try to put an emphasis on this, not to replace the human expertise, because as an investigator myself, this is very much here to stay, but to enhance our detection capabilities so you can process much higher volumes in real time and give the sort of human investigators or experts space to focus on the most complex and serious cases. So I think really, as simple as it might sound, you need technology at this point.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that buzzword of AI again. Do you see success in using AI to help detect these fraudulent documents?
Well, of course, I mean, that goes with our name, right? We ourselves leverage artificial intelligence and develop our own technology. I would, be as bold as to say industry leading, because we have hundreds of different detectors of how we analyze documents, everything from how a document was built, so the sort of structure of the document, over to, something we call submission characteristics. So how a document was submitted, and anything that might come with it. So yeah, of course, AI is a big tool and a big help in this regard, and something, I think we pride ourselves on regarding our own development, because we got a lot of brain power here. One of the things that very much enticed me to come over here was the large group of amazing and very smart, bordering on genius, I would dare say, people that are, developing this technology on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I had another podcast that I hosted, and the guest was Becky Holmes, and she's not a technologist, and she specializes in reporting about romance fraud, and she made a comment about how dystopian, knowing that fraudsters can leverage AI, knowing that the fraud industry is growing, is kind of dystopian, right? You could get a little depressed about how big the problem could get. And my take is there's people and companies like yours, people who are doing the right thing, and they truly are geniuses, and they're fighting the fraud, right? So I don't think that we don't need to be, let's say, frightened about this, the scope of the problem and how rapid it's changing, because there are good guys doing the right things, so it's good to hear that you guys are full of fraud fighters too.
Yeah, and I think, that might have happened throughout history with any kind of new technology or sort of something that emerged and people were scared of in the beginning. But the coin has always two sides. And I think, the sort of phrase we like to utilize through our messaging is that to fight bad AI, you need the good AI.
Yeah,
So, as you mentioned, this is not something to throw us into a deep pool of frustration, but it should make us sort of concerned and alert, and of course, trying to get as ready as we can to fight these guys.
right, right, absolutely. So we're starting to wind down now with the episode, and so I want to think a little bit about lessons learned. What are some of the strategies that you guys have found that have proven themselves to be more effective than other strategies? Like, is there some sort of lesson you could share?
So it really depends. I think because you could both think about lessons based on the threat intelligence and based on the document analysis itself. And I think if we mention the document analysis part, of course, and for anybody out there, you can always, of course, look at inconsistencies of documents, whether that's uh, logos, fonts, type size, the layout of a document. Anybody can watch out for these things, right? As much as I mentioned that these things are getting sophisticated and a lot of it will not be identifiable without technology. Uh, in the same way, you can look at repetitions, whether it's some figures, graphs, certain types of elements. So I think these are some sort of very basic approaches you can employ to the thinking process behind it, but very much with understanding that technology is an indispensable component because there are limits to how much human eyes can catch, right? And
Absolutely.
I think on the strategic side, with respect to threat intelligence, because that's my primary part, is understanding how big the fake document market or how big the threat or the problem is, and really understanding that this is not going away. One of the questions I regularly get when presenting or doing some of these webinars is, okay, you guys, have found all these farms. So, why wouldn't, and because they are so widely available and easily searchable, why wouldn't anybody like law enforcement take them down? And I think the main lesson I always mention here is that these farms are essentially unkillable. If you think about the global internet infrastructure that fraudsters very much leverage, they can set up anywhere from single instances to tens of farms hosted on servers across the globe, protected by VPNs, right? So even if you were able to take one farm down, if these guys will have backups on backups, as long as they have the document template database itself, the sort of replicability of their business is very easy. And from what we've seen is this really is a crime community. These guys like to share experience, knowledge. Obviously, there is some sort of competition involved as in any other kind of business. But some of the offerings I've seen, I think, for example, it would be interesting would be that farmers increasingly target people or serial fraudsters that want to buy thousands of templates. So you could buy a package including thousands of different templates, essentially allowing you to start your own farm, if that's your goal, of course. So really, I think it's some sort of, you could, in a certain way, you could think of it as a virus that's still will continue to spread and multiply for us to be able to understand how these guys operate and how we can catch their fake documents. So our tool is ready for this, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, strategy wise, of course, you could think about some basic principles of you need to understand how your sort of document ingestion or verification process looks like. You need to understand the whole workflow. But coming back to the sort of overall lesson of you need to understand that if you want to fight this seriously and comprehensively across the board, you will need to leverage the existing advanced technology.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great that you just finished on a piece of advice. So we're betting up against time. So it's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. As we're winding down, though, where should people go if they want to learn more about you, read these articles that you referenced, or learn about what Resistant AI does? Where would they go?
Thank you, Mike, so much for having us, of course, because it's been a pleasure for me as well. And I'm always happy to talk to other passionate fraud fighters. Obviously, the number one sort of point you can look to is the Resistant AI website, resistant.ai. We have our own threat intelligence section of our blog, so you can check out some of the articles that we've been writing, trying to, you know, describe different sort of modes of operations, different farmers, different techniques, that kind of stuff. You can visit our LinkedIn page where we try to share stuff on a daily basis, or a little plug that I would put in for myself. We also have a newsletter that we recently sort of restarted called the Threat Radar. This is a monthly distillation of all my findings or the main insights you should keep an eye out for. So happy if you guys would consider that as well. And of course, I always tell people, if you have any questions whatsoever, you can reach out to me directly. I very much will be happy to engage, whether it's going to be on LinkedIn or through, you know, email, any kind of channel you could think of. Happy to engage and in further discussion, whether it's just, you know, threat intel talk in general, or even showing anybody how our tools work in time.
Awesome. Awesome. It's been terrific talking to you. It's been a really exciting conversation. Thanks again. And yeah, look forward to talking to you in the future too.
Thank you so much, Mike, for having us, and all the best for the podcast in general, because I very much enjoy what you guys have been doing, and think it's important to you know, make the fraud fighting community feel lively and engaged. So best of luck.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind Enemy Lines. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss a conversation on fighting fraud. We'll see you on the next one.